When Israel came under attack from militant group Hamas in early October, India backed Israel fully. Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a supportive statement after the attacks, and sections of the Indian public have been highly vocal in their support for Israel. This reflects the strong relationship India and Israel have managed to build over the last 3 decades. We almost take it for granted these days. But it might interest you to know that India had a hostile policy towards Israel for decades. It voted against Israel joining the UN in 1949, it refused to fully normalize diplomatic ties all the way until 1992, and even excluded Israel from the 1982 Asian Games. So how, after all of this, did India and Israel go from foes to being friends? The story of India's policy on Israel actually begins before independence, during the nationalist movement against the British. In 1917, Britain declared that it would set up a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, which is roughly around here in the Middle East. After it won the First World War, Britain took over the territory of Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. Britain then facilitated the immigration of thousands of Jews to Palestine through the 1920s and 30s. At the time, the population was majority Arab, who opposed Britain's policy. And this policy later allowed the creation of Israel. Now, it's important to note that this is a vastly simplified version of a very complicated period in world history. But it sets us up to understand something about how India saw Israel. At the time, India's independence movement was picking up steam, and India's nationalist leaders saw what was happening in Palestine, including the immigration of Jews against the wishes of the local Arab community. This was seen as just another example of Britain's divide and rule tactics. Leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi opposed a Jewish homeland against the wishes of the Arabs. The Indian National Congress was at the time also engaged in a fierce struggle with the Muslim League, which tried to portray the Congress as a party only for Hindus. By taking up the cause of the Palestinians, the Congress tried to show India's Muslims that it would also support Islamic causes. With the League clamoring to be the exclusive representative of Indian Muslims, the Palestine issue became useful to the Congress party to shore up its pro-Arab and pro-Islamic credentials, said scholar P.K. Kumaraswamy in his study of India's Israel policy. India became independent in 1947, and Jawaharlal Nehru became India's first Prime Minister. Meanwhile, Israel was created in 1948. However, this creation led to the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, during which several Arab states like Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, among others, launched a war against Israel. Israel won that conflict, and thousands of Palestinians became refugees. Israel also took over a large chunk of the territories marked for the Palestinians under a UN partition plan. And this set up the Arab-Israeli rivalry, which we've seen play out to this day. Now, India voted against Israel's entry into the United Nations in 1949. Although it then recognized Israel in 1950, it refused to maintain full diplomatic ties by setting up embassies and exchanging ambassadors. India's unfriendly and later hostile attitude to Israel after 1947 were driven by a couple of things. First, domestic considerations. Congress leaders were worried that India's Muslims would find Palestine a sensitive issue. P.K. Kumaraswamy notes that the Palestinian cause was popular among India's Muslim electorate, and Congress leaders did not want to jeopardize that. As an example, Foreign Secretary J.N. Dixit pointed out that when India normalized ties with Israel in 1992, senior Congress leader Arjun Singh opposed the move since he felt that the Congress could lose Muslim votes in India. There's more. On the global stage, India became a major player in the non-aligned movement. This movement was closely tied to causes like anti-imperialism and solidarity with Afro-Asian countries that were struggling with imperialism. Israel was seen as aligned with the West and a product of that very imperialism. And that created an ideological division between India and Israel that was hard to bridge. There was also the Arab factor. India valued its relationship with the Middle Eastern countries, especially Arab countries, given oil sales, their importance in votes at the United Nations, and permits for Indians to work in those countries. The issue of Palestinian refugees and Israel's occupation of that territory was a live issue for these countries. And so India thought it better to stay away from Israel to preserve its other diplomatic relationships. So from 1947 to 1964, India limited official ties with Israel. In 1955, India allowed Israel to be excluded from the Bandung Conference, a major meeting of newly independent Asian and African nations. Again, India was afraid of how Arab states would react to Israel's presence at the conference. In 1956, Israel teamed up with Britain and France to attack Egypt during the Suez Canal crisis. India condemned this military aggression, but this only served to push both countries further apart. During the 1962 India-China war, Israel provided military assistance to India. However, Nehru's government did not openly acknowledge this support. Israel again provided assistance to India during the 1965 war with Pakistan. Meanwhile, in both of these conflicts, India's Arab partners did not show strong support for New Delhi's position. However, despite this, India's policy of keeping Israel at a distance continued. In fact, Indira Gandhi's tenure as Prime Minister saw bilateral ties hit their lowest point. Her government strongly condemned Israel's actions during the 1967 and 1973 Arab-Israeli wars. This criticism was not entirely unjustified, as Israel's military strikes in the 67 war led to the deaths of Indian peacekeepers. However, Israel provided support to India again during the 1971 India-Pakistan war, as historian Srinath Raghavan has revealed. Once again, this aid was not acknowledged, and again, India's partners expressed more sympathy for Pakistan's position in the war. Despite this, India backed the 1975 UN General Assembly resolution that declared Zionism, the controversial ideology which called for the creation of a Jewish homeland, as a form of racism. Relations improved under the Morarji Desai government, and Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan secretly visited India during this period. It wasn't much of a secret though, and became highly controversial given views of Israel in the country. The Desai government also eased restrictions on travel of Israelis to India. Ties did not really improve until Rajiv Gandhi took office in 1984. He met the Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres in 1985 and also eased the sports boycott on Israel at events like the 1987 Davis Cup. However, Israel's conflict with Palestine flared up again, and this, along with other factors, stalled engagement. But the trend was set, and in 1992, the Narasimha Rao government fully normalized diplomatic ties between the two countries. And there were a few reasons why India did this. First, the Cold War ended, and ideological divisions between India and Israel mattered less. India's proximity to the United States had clashed with India's official non-aligned policy. This, along with other Cold War buzzwords like anti-imperialism, became less important to India's foreign policy once the Cold War ended. Second, tensions between Israel and Palestine began to ease as both sides started to negotiate the Oslo Peace Accords. In fact, the accords were signed in 1993, just a year after the normalization of ties between India and Israel took place. These accords were seen as a major step forward in bringing peace to the Middle East, and this relaxation in the conflict allowed India to normalize ties with Israel without much diplomatic blowback. Third, the Palestinian cause became less popular in the Arab world. Now, since 1992, bilateral ties with Israel have been largely unstoppable. In 1992, bilateral trade stood at around $200 million. In 2022, this figure was closer to $10 billion. Besides trade, Israel soon became one of India's top defense suppliers. This included support for anti-missile systems, high-tech radars, and night vision equipment, among other things. Israel also provided military support during the 1999 Kargil War. Politically, Israel has also backed India on sensitive issues like Kashmir at major international forums. At the same time, the bilateral relationship also enjoys strong public support in both countries. A Pew survey found that Israelis view India more positively than any other country, while similar surveys of Indians show that Israel enjoys a significant degree of trust among the Indian public. In 2017, Narendra Modi became the first Indian Prime Minister to visit Israel, which represented a significant milestone. The reaction from Prime Minister Modi and the Indian public in the aftermath of the terror attacks in Israel reflects just how far the bilateral relationship has traveled since 1947.